Thanks very much. I want to thank Jordan for that introduction. And I know you had some excitement today just after Senator Merkley spoke. So I will do my best to try to recreate that excitement. But I can't guarantee it. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And I do know that there's a long list of people to thank, but I'll try to be brief. I know that Chris Kelly, your board chair, just said hello to Chris. Mark Riddle is here as well. Members of your board and folks from all across the country. How many people here are not from Pennsylvania? That is amazing. This never happens. You never get this chance. So the good news is you're having a great conference. For some of you, the bad news is we're not going to let you go back to your states, all right? We're going to capture you, keep you here at least until 2020. And then when 2020, we get our work done in 18 and 20, when they have an inauguration of a Democratic president in January of 2021, then we'll let you go back. No, I'm only kidding. You're allowed to go back. But I'm so grateful to have this opportunity because this is a very difficult time in our nation's history. And I don't have to remind you of that. And when you have a time of real challenge, and I think, frankly, real peril, that also creates opportunities for leadership, opportunities for achievement, and opportunities to win some battles. And I know a lot of us don't have a sense that we've been winning a lot of battles lately. But just consider where we are this coming week with health care. There is a good chance, and we're not there yet, but there is a good chance if we keep working today, tomorrow, throughout the next couple of days, until we actually have a vote in the Senate, which could happen Wednesday, or they could delay it again and again. But at some point, we're either going to have a vote or they will not have a vote at all. And we have a good chance of defeating a very bad bill that is a tax cut bill originally disguised as a health care bill. And that's something that has rallied people from all across the country. Not only people between the ages of 25 and 35, but folks of all age groups, of all ethnicities and backgrounds, and even people of different political philosophies. People know what happened here. They know that a bill developed in secret by a small number of United States senators. In fact, originally it was 13 Republican senators who had at least three things in common: basic ideology, political party, and gender. They're all men, okay? That's what happened. And since that time, the country got to examine their work product. And it was a bill that gutted Medicaid, and at the same time it was gutting Medicaid to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. In fact, the previous version of the bill was a cut of about $773 billion. The same time they were giving away the store to the super rich to the tune of, in that last version of the bill, 2 or 3 versions ago, more than $540 billion. The most gross, obscene juxtaposition of two policies, right? Taking from Medicaid for kids and for people with disabilities and for seniors, and giving that revenue to the super rich who don't need it, and many of them don't want it. I'm certain of that. So we have a chance to, in the next couple of days, to stop bad policy from going forward. Now, that may, in some quarters, may not seem like an achievement, because we'd rather be in a position where we're enacting legislation, dealing with major issues, whether it's health care or the economy and the jobs of the future, dealing with climate change, expanding opportunity, all of those major priorities. But we have a chance this week to do something for our country and do something for the future by making sure that this bill doesn't pass. We know that we have responsibility to deal with some of the problems in our healthcare system. That can come next, after we stop this bill. And I want to thank you for your help in doing that, because I have never seen in my lifetime more engagement, more sustained engagement, more focus, more determination than I've seen over the last number of months. Whether it was in the fights on the cabinet, the Trump cabinet, whether it was the argument against the confirmation of then Judge, now Justice Gorsuch, whether it was in the health care debate that I just talked about, whether it will be in the budget debate, which is something we haven't even talked much about, the most extreme far-right budget proposal, appropriations proposals we've ever seen. So no matter what the fight, you've been there, and you've given us energy, you've given us optimism, you've given us inspiration, and ultimately, you've helped us to get results. And I'm encouraged by that, no matter the difficulty, no matter the circumstance. So we have at least one issue that's most immediate in the next couple of days. But we also have a lot of other issues which sometimes arise and then recede, sometimes present themselves and there's debate and there's energy and activity, and then they start to fade. And one of those issues, I think, this isn't just for the next generation or the generation after that. It's not simply an issue that involves the entire planet. I think it's an issue that has a moral gravity to it that few others can match. And that's the challenge of climate change and all that entails. Now, we had a major setback, obviously, when the president pulled out of the climate accords, the Paris Climate Accords. Almost immediately as we're trying to absorb that bad news, that bad decision by the president, it was rather interesting to see how people began to not just be dejected about it, but to rise up and say, well, if he's not going to do his job on climate change, I'm going to do my job. Whether that was the leader of a corporation who made that clear before he made that decision and after, whether it was mayors like Mayor Peduto here in Pittsburgh, whether that was a governor like Governor Wolf or other governors, no matter what the circumstance, you had people coming forward as leaders to take on this challenge, to say that we are responsible for God's creation. We're responsible for those who might be not just adversely affected, not just whole communities engulfed in suffering because we haven't done our job, but also something as fundamental as what is our obligation? What is our obligation to a child here in the United States in terms of the health care debate, in terms of what happens to a child affected by a cut to Medicaid? That child could be here in the city of Pittsburgh from a low-income family who through no fault of their own is in that circumstance, and they can get not just coverage of Medicaid, but some of the best early periodic screening, diagnosis, treatment, that great program that Medicaid has. So we have to ask those questions of ourselves about what is our obligation to a child. But in the context of climate, we have to ask ourselves, what is our obligation to the children of the world? So just at a time when, because of advancements in technology, advancements in medications, advancements in the delivery of health care around the world and in places like sub-Saharan Africa, just as we've made progress that would make the life of that child better, that would allow that little girl to get the medication she needs at a younger age, to maybe have access to other programs or opportunities to allow her to get through life even though she's born into a terrible circumstance. But here we are now with the threat being, even as there are advancements for that child in that country, there's still the possibility that if there are setbacks on climate that lead to such changes where you'll have drought, which then leads to starvation in many cases, that child's life expectancy will be badly compromised, and she may be the victim of what they call stunting, that she literally will not grow because of a lack of nutrition, a food insecure or hunger nightmare for that child. So when we take on the mantle of leadership on any issue, but maybe especially on an issue of such transcendence like climate change, we need to be asking ourselves those questions. What is our obligation to that child? Far away, in another country, another time zone, another continent. But I think climate change reminds us that we have an obligation to her, just like we have an obligation to the child here in Pittsburgh or any other place. So I think so many people in this country now understand that is a responsibility that they have. And I have no doubt whatever, that because of the commitment of the people in this room, the people in this audience today, and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands like you across the country, that we will meet our obligation on dealing with climate change, and I'm grateful for your help on meeting that basic obligation that we have. Now, we also have a number of challenges when it comes to issues here at home, whether it's job creation and the real challenge of a changing economy. We know what happened over the last generation when it came to globalization and automation and a whole long list of other changes in our society, even worldwide, that's led to a lot of job loss. We're likely headed into a period now which could be even worse if we're not prepared for that. So we've got to be thinking about how do you create the jobs of the future? Or how do you make sure that even as you advance in technology, do you have a game plan for those who might be left behind? Do you have the training and the education and the preparation regimen or programs or strategies so that those individuals can pivot and move into a different career, or can pivot and move into a different job? And that is a monumental challenge, the solution to which I'm not sure either political party has adequately wrestled with, considered, or developed solutions to confront that challenge. We've got a lot of work to do on that. We're going to need your help to meet that challenge. We're also going to have to meet the challenge that in so many communities there's I think a distance from, and even a deep frustration with Washington and what doesn't happen in Washington. A frustration that a lot of people from a distance will look at Washington and say, well, they fight a lot, they have political conflict, but sometimes it's not about me and my life. Sometimes it's not about my family. And so maybe because that is happening, and maybe for some other reasons, I'm going to choose a different path. And some of that dynamic played out, of course, in last year's election. We have to meet that challenge as well. It's not good enough for me as a Democrat to say, well, we're just going to try to do our best and fight some of these battles and see where it ends up for our party. We've got to be committed to reaching out to people, some of whom we haven't communicated very well to. We haven't engaged enough. Folks in small towns and sometimes in rural areas who might be Democrats or not, but even among some Democrats, we've got to make sure that we listen, that we spend some time with and sit with and listen to their concerns, listen to their hopes and aspirations for the future, and try to meet them where they are, as opposed to just having a divide in this country that's far too sharp for any kind of progress or momentum. And I think that's a challenge that is worthy not just of a great country, but I think it's a challenge worthy of a great party. And I know we're not here to talk about campaigns, but this is a challenge for my party in the next 2 years before the next election, and certainly a challenge between now and 2020. I wanted to bring to your attention an issue that I know that many people here have had some direct experience with, and in large measure, I hope you don't have any direct experience with this issue, but you probably know someone who has, and that's sexual assault on our campuses. A grave, serious problem. It became the main area of inquiry and questioning when I was questioning now Secretary DeVos, and then Betsy DeVos, when I was asking her questions about the Department of Education. Just at a time when we had made some progress, not enough progress, but some progress on this issue. We got passed a bill that I led the effort on, the Campus Save Act, which said to universities and colleges for the first time, you got to do more. You've got to have rules. Everybody on campus has to know those rules. You've got to make sure, Mr. and Mrs. College or University, that everyone knows on that campus that they are part of dealing with this challenge. That it's not as if this is just a challenge for a small group of students. That every student, young men as well as young women, young men have to be part of the solution. Young men have an obligation to help out. Part of what we did in that legislation was to say the college or university can't simply put rules on a table and hope that everyone reads it, that you've got to engage the campus. You've got to educate bystanders so that if you're at a party or you're in a circumstance where you see something or you suspect something might happen, that you try your best to intervene. You try your best to short circuit any kind of assault that might occur. We also say to the victim that we're going to make sure that you have information long before that horrific moment. And if you are a victim, that the college and university has obligations to you. They have to give you a process that is worthy of a system of justice that will hold the perpetrator accountable. They have to give you information to allow you to make the decision as to whether or not you want to take your case to an authority off the campus, meaning to a law enforcement authority. If you think the campus security isn't up to it, or you have doubts about that, and if you want to seek a protective order from a court to protect you from that perpetrator, that college or university has to help you get that protective order and has to help you to benefit from that protective order. If you need to change your class because that perpetrator might be in the class or that perpetrator might be living near you, so if you need to change your living arrangements, your class schedule, or you need any other help, that school has to provide that help to you. So that was a measure of progress or advancement in the fight against sexual assault. By one estimate, one of every 5 young women are victims of sexual assault on college campuses. So in the midst of the recognition of the problem, the effort made by President Obama, Vice President Biden, and their whole administration, and then in the aftermath of a bill, Campus Save, being passed, what happened? We have an election. We elect a new president who appoints Betsy DeVos. Now, my question to her was basically, what are you going to do about this problem? But the more particular question is the guidance that was issued by the U.S. Department of Education. What are you going to do as Secretary of Education to make sure that that guidance stays in place? And what about the policies in the Campus Save Act? What about any other new policies that we can implement to lessen the likelihood substantially that a young woman would be the victim of assault on a college campus? And it was very clear to me in questioning that Betsy DeVos was not too interested in my point of view, or not too interested in pursuing this issue the way I wanted to. And it got worse from there. She's had meetings recently which, frankly, based upon who was invited to the meetings, some representation from the victim side of it, but inviting groups that were, to say that they were hostile to the Campus Save Act or even hostile to Title IX protections would be an understatement. So I don't want to dwell on this Department of Education intrigue, But Betsy DeVos heard from me this week, and she will keep hearing from me until we get this policy right, and both parties have more work to do. You've got a big agenda today. I know you've been here a while, and I know I'm one of many speakers, so I don't want to hold you too long. But I did want to maybe conclude with a couple of thoughts. One part of the dynamic of the last couple of months is that we've seen this generation in front of me today, your generation, rise up in more ways than I could ever have imagined, with a degree of intensity and resolve that I don't think anyone has ever witnessed before. And I want you to know something. It is not a drop in the ocean. It is not a tree falling in the woods that no one hears. Your engagement on these issues, and others we could cover today, has both informed and inspired the work that we try to do. And it's given our work, whether it's in the Senate or the House or in any other public office, I think a sense of urgency, a sense of purpose, and a sense of intensity and focus that we probably didn't have before. Give me another example, student debt. I think that there's potential, and we're still a ways from a consensus, but potential for bipartisan work on this issue, whether it's lowering interest rates or whether it's figuring out a way to lessen that burden so that you don't have to carry as heavy a burden when you're finishing higher education or beyond. So I want you to know that you're having an impact. You're impacting this debate in those cabinet fights by way of your presence, sometimes by way of your messages on social media, your engagement on that platform, your engagement personally in your own communities. I was amazed at how many people would march on a Sunday, go to a meeting on a Monday. They'd be online the whole time, most of the week. They'd do something else Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. Every day was engagement. Every day was resistance. Every day was some kind of action or output to advance a cause or to stop something from happening that would be bad for the country. So in a very real way, you've not only advanced the ball, but you've acted as a patriot should. You know, that great line from America the Beautiful, "Oh, beautiful for patriot dream that sees beyond the years." Your work, your intensity, your engagement, your determination to change the status quo, your determination to prevent an extreme right-wing Congress or a president who's going down the wrong path, all of that, I think, is part of not just a political or a policy agenda that you have, it's part of that dream you have for your country. That you by your own work, you have that dream of a patriot. That you're thinking not just of your own circumstances, you're thinking about who we must become, to whom are we responsible, what are our obligations, not just to our communities and to our families, but to the country and to the world. So you've had in your gut that fire and that dream of a patriot, and I thank you for that, because we're going to need that in big doses in the next couple of years. We're going to have a big battle between now and 2018, and then we will have an election, which will be a verdict on the president and his administration and the party that he leads, even though he's not on the ballot. So that election will be a verdict of one kind or another. But no matter what that verdict, there'll be another verdict 2 years later, among the two most important elections of anyone's lifetime. I know you hear that a lot, but because of what happened last November, it might actually be true this time. So look, I've seen the converse of this, but it's the same drive. I saw what happened in 2008 when President Obama was running and when he was elected. And that was virtually entirely affirmative. People coming up to me when I was campaigning, or when I was campaigning with then Senator Obama, and telling me why they were there. Now, sometimes people say, well, I'm out here today to stop a health care bill, and thank God you're doing that. I'm out here today to stop this from happening. Or I'm out here today to protest what's happening on a particular policy or issue. But in that case, it was affirmative. They were saying, I'm here because I believe in him. I believe in his optimism, his hope, his plans for the future. And we will have more moments like that. But we just have to do our best, I think, to remember what energized us in that election and in elections like it. But I'm not sure in my lifetime there was an election like '08. But remember that as kind of inspiration and sustenance for these times where a lot of what we'll continue to do will be in opposition. And that's okay. Now, we're going to have our party, I think, will have a very strong, in the next couple weeks you'll see it, a very strong economic message. And I know people have been calling for that, and people around the country are right. We need to have an economic message. We need to have a message that points towards the future. But we can't abandon or discharge or forego our responsibility to stop things from happening when they are. And you're helping us with that, both affirmatively as well as in opposition. So I have a lot of gratitude in my heart today for your help, for your confidence, and for your determination to be part of the solution. And I know the road is long, but somewhere in the Bible it says something about we're going to run and not grow weary. And we're going to need that in the next couple of months and even the next couple of years, because we have some big fights ahead against very powerful interests. And on some days they will have more money. On other days they will have troops of their own. But I'm very confident that this leadership organization and your involvement, your engagement in these issues is going to be able to be not just successful intermittently, but will be triumphant on a lot of big issues over time. And I know I'm not trying to understate the challenge, but I have a lot of confidence in you. I have a lot of confidence in your generation to be able to lead that. So let me conclude with just one thought, because I want to end with a note of optimism despite all of our challenges. It goes back really to the founding of our country, with the end of a process which was rancorous and partisan and divisive, and ever more so without air conditioning, when they debated our Constitution. It was we had a new nation, but it wasn't working too well. The Articles of Confederation weren't knitting together the country. It just wasn't working for a number of reasons. So we have a constitutional convention, but it was bitter and rancorous and partisan. And it was not at all clear that this new Constitution would come into effect at all. In fact, there were times when looked as if it was headed in the wrong direction. One of the emblematic pieces of furniture in that whole scene was the presiding officer's chair. I don't know if anyone's put your hand up if you've heard the story about the chair. The presiding officer's chair had a and they still have a replica of it in Philadelphia. It had a big back to it, a beautiful carving with beautiful woodworking, and there was a carving of the sun. But the carving depicted only half of the sun. And so Benjamin Franklin, weeks later, when the good news was our new country, a new republic was born because the Constitution was ratified, or not ratified, but approved by the delegates, Benjamin Franklin was talking to some of the delegates, and one of them made notes about what he said. And he said, basically, I wasn't sure we'd get here. Because of all the disagreements, I wasn't sure. And he said, I often looked at the presiding officer's chair and that carving of the sun. And he said, I didn't know what that was depicting, because it was only half of the sun carved. He said, I wasn't sure whether it would depicted a rising or a setting sun. And then Franklin uttered those words which I think our country was, in a sense, founded on. Words not just of inspiration, but words of optimism, and words of, I think, a determination to have a new and successful country, young though that it was, hours old. Benjamin Franklin said he wasn't sure what that carving of the sun represented. And then he said the following, now at length I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun. And that's the optimism upon which our country was born. And that optimism has been part of what has animated our success over time. Even in the darkest days, and think about days much darker even than today, days when this country was stretched to the breaking point, when this country was in total conflict, armed internal conflict, as we know the Civil War was, horrific depressions, cataclysmic economic trauma, the Great Depression, the most recent Great Depression. Just imagine what Barack Obama was staring into when he was elected. If he looked behind him, he saw several million jobs lost in the months leading up to his inauguration. If he had the supernatural clairvoyance to see ahead of him, he would see several million more jobs being lost in front of him. So for those 6 or 8 months before he took office and after, that period, the fall of '08 roughly to the spring of '09, 8 million jobs plus lost in the United States of America. And the president would tell you that as much as we were staring into the abyss of the collapse of our financial system in October of '08, while he was a candidate, he was told upon election in December of '08 that we were staring into the abyss a second time. The nation didn't know as much about that one, but we were still in grave jeopardy in December of '08, prior to all that job loss. So he was walking into one hell of a mess, one hell of an economic nightmare that he had to try to manage and try to, over time, wrestle to the ground. And he did it, and he did it with the help, frankly, of one party. I don't like saying that, but I think it's true. We didn't get much help at all. For example, in the Recovery Act. We didn't get much help at all on a number of things that we had to dig ourselves out of. So because of all that history of other periods of darkness and how we came through them, and because of that optimism that you have, the optimism that helps you stay involved and engaged, that determination you have to make the world better, the world of our country or the world itself, I have great confidence we're going to meet all these challenges. Not without hard work, not without setbacks, not without sometimes losing, but I think ultimately we're going to be triumphant because you will lead us. So we need you to show us. We need you to show us that leadership. So I'm very much honored that you're here in this great city and in our Commonwealth. And if you study the history of Pittsburgh and the history of southwestern Pennsylvania, if you want to talk about a story of triumph over darkness, read those stories. And the way the people of this city, this county, and this region didn't wait for the future, didn't wait for someone to pull them up. They invented the future here in Pittsburgh and pulled themselves up by their own hard work and their own innovation. And a lot of that was because of the dynamism and the intensity and the engagement of young people and some people who aren't so young. So we're grateful for your leadership, grateful for you're willing to stay engaged, and I look forward to working with you as long as I have a chance. Thanks, and God bless you.